All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to Science Unplugged. Good to see you all again. We were on hiatus for a couple of weeks during the December holidays and the New Year, but we are back, re-energized, and ready to start up. I guess technically this would be season 2 of Science Unplugged, which is great. Even though season 1 only had 3 episodes, but you know, it is what it is. But the great thing is that we have a whole number of episodes lined up. I think we have episodes and guests lined up all the way through April, which is going to be great. So you are going to get a fresh dose of Science Unplugged every Thursday, 8 p.m. East Coast time, and you know, we're going to just explore all of your scientific curiosities. And so for all the new people who are here, the new, the old, everybody, thank you for joining us again, by the way. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are in the world. And I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, and the purpose of this show is not only to expose you to the newest, the hottest science that's going on out there in the world from the youngest and brightest minds available, scientists themselves, but we want to make you all feel like you are the scientists, okay? We want your questions, we want your queries, we want your curiosities, we want it all. We want to see the gears turning in your brain. That's what makes us as scientists so excited about science, right? Is that knowing that the public is understanding and grasping the things that we're doing, and we're feeding off of the public and learning everything that we want from them so that we can try and solve and tackle the problems that challenge us all today. So so that's where we're at right now. So this is going to be great. So to begin today's episode, now one thing is different today. I have to announce is that you can see that I'm missing my co-host Stephen Jarrett, but Stephen's okay. Nothing happened to him. He will be here next week. Oh, thank you, Chet. I want to remind you guys to tweet this out. Post it on Facebook. Post it on Twitter. This is your number one stop for science on Blab. Thursdays at 8 p.m. Science Unplugged. So if you would be so kind to share and join us and bring all your friends in, that would be absolutely awesome. So Stephen Jarrett is not with me today, but don't worry, he will be back next week. Stephen actually is in Mexico right now searching for meteorites. So he has a good excuse why he can't be here today, but he will be around with his crazy science here. I know some of you have commented about Stephen's crazy science here, but and he does. I'm jealous actually that I don't have crazy science here like Stephen. But he's out looking for meteorites. Like, what a cool place to be. So we wish him luck, and hopefully he comes back with some awesome results. So today's guest is someone who is a good friend of mine and is a really, really brilliant scientist in his own right. And he is actually going to be calling in now. Let's see here, see if he's calling in. All right. Oh, there he is, Jesse John, everybody. I'd like to introduce you all to Jesse John. Jesse, what's going on, man?
What's going on, Pete? Hello to everyone out there in the interwebs. Nice to see you all.
That's right. So for those of you, many of you have not met Jesse before. He was actually on our second episode of Science Unplugged briefly. We did a lightning round of science talks with I think 6 or 7 different scientists. Jesse was one of them, but he did so great, and he does such interesting stuff that I had to have him back on the show so we can do a full hour learning about all the cool stuff that Jesse does. So Jesse John is a 4th-year PhD candidate in the geosciences department at Stony Brook University, and he is a geochemist. That is your title, right, Jesse? Geochemist?
That's right.
All right, cool. So before we even talk science and get into the awesome stuff that you're doing and the exciting scientific work and the questions that you're trying to answer, tell us about you. Who are you, Jesse? Tell us about your educational background. How did you get interested in science in the first place?
Well, the first thing I would like to say is Pete gave a great introduction, but I want everyone to temper their expectations. Just bring it down a little bit.
Such a humble guy.
Not that brilliant.
So,
all right. So this is my origin story. So I was born in the twin republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. And so that means I spent a lot of time barefoot and bareback, just hiking through the woods and being ingratiated with nature, climbing through, hanging out in the rainforest and going through waterfalls. And that's where my love for geology came. I did a lot of outdoor exploring and trying to understand just the geological features that I would see, like waterfalls, and why would we have mountain ranges in a tiny island. And I visited a place called the Pitch Lake. Now, a pitch lake is a very strange place, right? It's where you have petroleum at the surface in the form of a lake. And I was really mesmerized by this place. A lot of native Indians from Trinidad there, also Native Americans, I should say, did a lot of rituals there. And it was a very majestic place. But all of the houses in that area was actually built on wooden stilts because the ground actually moved because petroleum is so malleable. And so it was a very strange place. And so trying to understand the island that I was born in and trying to understand these features was the birthplace of my love for science. And so when my parents immigrated to America in 2000, I already knew that I wanted to be a scientist. I wasn't quite sure in what particular field. And even to this day, I think if I had had better bio teachers or chem teachers or physics teachers, I probably would have been in one of those fields. But my love for the outdoors sort of drove my interest in geology. Now, this term that Pete used, called geochemistry, is a very peculiar term, and it might be the first time people are hearing this. Now, geology is a field that welcomes a lot of collaborations with surrounding fields. So you'll hear geophysicists, geochemists, biogeochemists, and all that geochemist really means is that as a geologist, we use the tools that chemists typically use to solve geological problems. And so part of what I'm really passionate about is about removing toxins from the environment.
So before, but before we even get there, I just still want to go basic. Tell us about your education. So you grew up in Trinidad, right? And you
I kind of forgot that.
Hiking the mountains, right? And you became you were inspired by all these natural wonders that were surrounding you and your environment, and there were lakes that had petroleum in them, which sounds awesome, right? I mean, don't have to drill for it; just go to the lake, right?
Right there.
And but so you came to Trinidad. You went from Trinidad. You came to the States. Where'd you go to college? How did tell us how you got into doing the PhD and what got you where you are today?
Right. So when I came to the U.S., I went to high school here, and I actually was thinking about what college to go to. And I was accepted to many colleges. Some of them had expensive tuitions, and they would give me scholarships or, hey, we could give you $20,000, but who's going to pay for the other $20,000? I can't. So I took my talents to CUNY, Brooklyn College, and there we had a really strong geology department, and that's what really kind of sort of furthered my love for geology. We had several field trips and field schools. Like, for instance, I got to spend a month and a half in Death Valley, California, mapping out parts of that region. And so that really grew my interest in research. And so once I got into thinking about research, it was only natural that I wanted to pursue graduate education because I felt like I needed more geology. And so I did a master's degree also in CUNY. And once I was done with that, my advisor...
I love what you just said. I felt like I needed more geology.
Right? I needed more. It wasn't enough.
I couldn't get enough geology. I needed more geology. That's great.
Yeah, I needed more. I really needed to get more. I wanted to develop more as a scientist. I knew that in order to do that, I would have to step into the lab and really get more ingratiated with research. And so it was a natural progression once I was finished with my master's to look to pursue doctoral studies because I really wanted to contribute to knowledge, right? As scientists, we always think about solving big problems and standing on the shoulders of giants. So the only way to do that was to pursue my PhD experience. And the professors at Stony Brook gave me a great opportunity. They made me an offer I couldn't resist. And so that's how I ended up working here at Stony Brook in the geoscience department as a doctoral student.
Perfect, man. So you mentioned you're a geochemist and how geochemists use the tools that chemists use to solve geological or answer geological questions, geological problems. So since we're talking about problems and you and I are both scientists, there are problems that are just constantly on our head that we're trying to solve. What is the passion, right? What is it that keeps you up at night? What is the problem that you really want to solve?
Right. So the thing that keeps me up at night is there's a lot of things, right? Paying bills as a graduate student, What am I going to do when I'm done with the PhD? But from a scientific perspective, what really keeps me up at night is how do we remove environmental toxins, right? So when you think about the air we breathe, when you think about the water that we drink, when you think about the soil that's beneath us that we grow all our food out of, there are toxins that are anthropogenic, meaning man-made toxins, or there might be toxins from natural occurrences that we need to essentially remove from the environment in order to ensure that we're living safely. And so that's what keeps me up at night. Can I invent new ways to remove toxins from the environment?
You want to get rid of these toxins. What are the?
Yes.
Before I even say this, I want to remind our viewers that this actually I hear a bit of an echo coming from. I don't know if it's something happens on Blab every so often. I think we're okay right now.
Okay.
Let us know if there's an issue, guys, in the chat. What I want to remind the people in the chat is that if you have a question, I mean, this conversation here is not just between me and Jesse. We want you guys to jump in, right? So you can hit /Q, type your questions to Jesse, and then we'll open up the cam slots in a bit. And I really encourage you guys to come on cam and ask Jesse questions directly, because we love when we actually get to see the public and have the public interact directly with us. That's really what turns on the scientist. Would you agree, Jesse?
I would agree. And, sometimes people just get tired of hearing Pete. We want to hear your voice too.
No one wants to hear. Okay. So,
but seriously, the more input we can get from the audience would be great. We want you guys to be a part of the experience. That's why I'm here doing this, so that we can give you guys some, direct contact to scientists who are trying. That's part of our duty, to educate the public and also to interact with the public.
Absolutely. So let's talk about these wastes. It's your mission to figure out ways to get this toxic waste out of the environment. So what is it about these wastes? Why are they toxic? What is it doing to our environment? And so let's start there. What are these toxins also?
So toxins can be in anything that we interact with can potentially be a toxin. So you're always thinking about, how does this affect humans? How does this affect the environment? And at what concentrations do they start to become toxic? Some of the projects I'm involved with are very linked to radioactivity. So we're thinking about leftover waste from the arms race that we had with Russia during the Cold War. So there's a lot of leftover uranium and plutonium that we have stored here in the US, and we want to be able to remediate those safely. Another toxin that I'm working on is called the global king of toxins. Everyone has probably heard about arsenic toxicity. And so arsenic has affected, throughout human history, the most people on the planet. I mean, hundreds of millions of people have been poisoned by arsenic and are continuing to be poisoned by arsenic currently. So that's another one that I think about removing. We were having a conversation earlier about in Flint, Michigan, where we have sort of lead being toxically introduced into people's water there. And so when I hear things about that, it really just gets my drive going. Like, what can we do to help these people that have their water source, the things that we depend on every day that we take for granted, being polluted and also contaminated and potentially harming their health long term.
Right. So somebody also mentioned about, Joe asked a question here. Would being able to nuke the radioactive waste make nuclear power clean, viable, and safe? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I understand what he means by nuke. If you mean actually adding an explosion to radioactive?
If you can make it. Can we take this radioactive waste and use it for nuclear power, I guess is what he's trying to say.
Right. So that's part of what we're interested in doing. So we have processes. So I'm not particularly working on that, but there are methods by which people take low concentrations of radioactive waste and increase their concentrations to the point where they actually can be used as a fuel source. And so some of the technologies that I'm working on could potentially be used in that way. And that is definitely important. Like, for instance, when you go get PET scans in the hospital, positron emission tomography scans, they also use radioactivity to actually image things in your body. And so the medical industry produces a lot of waste, and they're very interested in reusing the waste that they actually use. So There are people working on this topic, and that's definitely something that we can put a lot of effort into to move forward in the future. I think if we want to use radioactivity in the future as a fuel source, if we want to look at nuclear power plants as the future, then we need to have a system in place where we're reusing this stuff and being eco-friendly about it.
Great. Kyle also asked. Kyle, it's /Q if you want the question up there. But I still see it, so I'm going to throw it to Jesse here. He wants to know: is your research mostly focused on just elements like radioisotopes and stuff, or what about larger molecules?
Larger molecules is a field that my research is not predominantly focused on, but something that I'm very interested in also. We do have a project currently that has the potential to move in that direction. But a lot of the materials that we use in the geological field, especially in my particular lab, it's very difficult for us to accommodate larger materials because of just how our materials are made up to. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I don't want to jump the gun when we start talking about nanomaterials. But yes, we do have an interest in larger materials. Some of them are very difficult to remove, but they do pose a threat to society, and eventually we do have to address those also.
We'll take JD's question here, and then I want to get into what it is that you're working on exactly. What are these technologies to remove these wastes? But just to hit JD's question here, he wants to know about arsenic reduction mitigation in soil. And how it's showing up in wines. I know JD is a person who works in the wine industry. Do you know anything about that?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, arsenic is a natural component of a lot of soils, especially if you have minerals that contain arsenic that absorbs to their surface. And then if you have, plants can absorb them readily. They can go into a water source if rain is falling constantly, if you have a lot of groundwater movement. So it's a very mobile toxin. And so it's particularly dangerous because it's so mobile. One of the technologies that we're working on right now is actually in collaboration with some biologists and some people that are crystallographers too. And what we're trying to do is essentially take a gene and switch on the ability, instead of it eating what it typically eats, we want to change it so that it can actually eat arsenic. And then we reintroduce that gene into a bacteria and use that bacteria to then, its sole living purpose is to find arsenic and remove it from the environment. And so that's one of the projects that are in the early stages that we're designing now in collaboration with some biologists.
You're taking bacteria. I mean, I'm a microbiologist, so anything bacteria, you've already got my attention, right? So, but you're taking bacteria and you're putting genes into them, proteins into them that allows them to eat the toxin, to eat up the arsenic. Did I hear that correctly?
That is absolutely correct. That's the idea that we have. Will it work? Will it work, people? We don't know. It might work. It may not work. That's the beauty of science. You get to test new ideas and see what the feasibility of it is. So far, we've talked to about 4 or 5 professors about these ideas. And the great thing about it is that none of them laughed us out of the room. That's really what we were expecting, to be laughed out of the room. Like, oh, it's a ridiculous idea. But so far, we've gotten good feedback. We've gotten to the point where we've purified the protein, where we have that particular site already mutated so that the organism will eventually be able to attack arsenic. And our hope is that when we introduce it back into the bacteria, that because we just changed that one particular site, that the organism will still be able to function, and we'll just change that one habit that it has. Instead of eating what it traditionally eats, now it has an affinity and a huge appetite for arsenic. So we'll be able to test that in the next coming months. And so hopefully that'll be a new technology where we can really go after some of these bigger molecules, because then we can tune these bacteria that are traditionally harmful to us, and we can put them to work for us.
That's awesome. Making bacteria hungry for arsenic, everybody. You heard it here first on Science Unplugged, the wave of the future. How awesome is that? So we're going to open up the cams real soon, but I really want to, we touched on one of these technologies that you're working. This is a proof of concept thing that you're doing right now. It's
proof of concept.
The new hot project that you have going. But what is it that you do every day? So you mentioned nano materials on removing waste. So what do you mean by nano, and what are you doing with nanomaterials to aid you in understanding how to remove toxic waste from the environment?
Right. So most people, when they hear me say nano, they might be thinking of a nano iPad or a nano iPod or some sort of technology device that has the Q nano next to it. But if you want to have some nano sense, the easiest way for you to do it is to think about the smallest thing you particularly think of. Some people might think of a virus. And that's a good starting point. If you just go 100 times smaller to that, now you have the ability to enter into the nano regime. And so when particles are actually at the nanoscale, 10 to the -9, or 100 times smaller than a virus, then they behave very differently than when they're at a bulk stage sometimes. So for instance, everyone knows that gold is a very non-reactive metal. It's a beautiful piece of metal that we actually can see it. Everyone knows the color of gold. But when gold is actually at a nanoscale, instead of the traditional color it has, that bright yellow, it actually is red, has a really beautiful red color. And so you can start to change the properties just by making it into a nanoscale.
So if you take like a lump of gold and you get it down to the nanoscale, it actually takes on different properties that you can exploit. Is that correct?
Right. You can exploit it also. So not only does it change color, but that's just one example of how you can make a material nano and change its traditional properties that we don't see when it's in a bulk phase, when it's in a larger scale. And so not only is traditional gold non-reactive, it's known to not have any reactions with anything unless you really, push it to its limit. But nano gold is actually quite reactive. And so you can make miniaturized things and utilize their property. And so that's what we work on. One of the materials we work on, it's called monosodium titanate. So it's NaTi2O5 for the chemists that are listening to. And this material is extremely useful in removing radioactive elements such as uranium and plutonium and even lead from the environment. So when we talk about Flute, Michigan, that might possibly be a technology that could be useful there. But when we make this material nanophase, the actual speed, the reactivity of the material is extremely fast. So you're improving the function of it by making it small because it's more reactive. Think about when you're cooking, why would you make ingredients smaller? Why do you cut up onions and why do you cut up garlic? It's because you want the flavor to be released more and the reactivity is faster, right? So it's the same concept with some of these technologies that we're using. When they're very small and they're in a nano size, they're extremely reactive and it improves the removal of these toxins from the environment.
That's great. So you call this a nano Alcatraz, right? Is that it's sequestering this, right? So how would this be implemented in, say, like a radioactive waste site? Actually, I'm still hearing a little. Maybe if you turn your volume down a little bit, Jesse, on your might be. Is that better? Back. Let's try it now. Oh yeah, that's much better. Okay, cool. Can you hear me okay still?
My volume was a little bit too high. Sorry out there for everyone listening. I can hear you.
That's good. No, we're good. So how are you going to use nano Alcatraz to clean up sites like Chernobyl or Fukushima and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, everyone knew about Chernobyl was a massive event that they still have. The best technology there is just putting a lead dome on top of the radioactive waste that they have there. Great. In Fukushima in 2011, everyone saw that happen live, right? Video cameras around there. It started spewing to the Pacific Ocean. The best technology that we have there is just building massive storage tanks. That's literally the best we can do. Build another tank. They have thousands commissioned and thousands even more. What I hope to do and what we're trying to address actually is some of the issues here in America. Even in the US, we have 130 metric tons. Just to give you an idea of what a metric ton is, the average car probably weighs about 2 tons. We have 130 tons of high-level nuclear waste, meaning has high components of uranium and plutonium in it, here sitting in our soils, and we're trying to deal with that problem here. And so how that would work is we would introduce this material into these massive storage tanks that have the waste. The material will then absorb uranium or plutonium. So it's removing it from the liquid form where it's highly contaminable and it can actually go into your water source, into the soil. it can start to have vapor forms and go into the air. Now it's being moved into a solid form where it's being imprisoned inside of my little nano Alcatraz. So think about the traditional prison system. We want to make sure that each one of these uranium atoms, each one of these plutonium atoms are locked up in individual cells, and that they're locked up safely. And then once it's in that form, we can then move on to the last phase, which is the vitrification phase, where they turn it into a glass. And that's may sound a little bit fragile. Oh, you're making radioactive glass. What if it shatters and breaks on the ground?
The what phase did you say? Oh, hold on a second.
It's a vitrification phase.
See, I have something here called the jargon police. Right, so this is to warn people that there's a jargony term out there, and so could you explain for us in lay terms, now that you've been attacked by the jargon police here, what does vitrification mean?
It just turns something into glass. So you basically heat it up, and right when it's in a molten phase, you cool it really fast, it turns into a glass. So every window pane you have in your house is probably made through the same process. Right. But the whole idea is that those glasses are extremely resilient and a lot safer than having it in the liquid form. So we're moving it down the waste stream into a much safer form where we can compact the waste and have it stored safer so that it won't be susceptible to polluting and contaminating our environment. But that technology can also be used in other places, just like Michigan Flint. So we can essentially build the equivalent of, Brita filters made out of these materials eventually. And you can pour your lead contaminated water through there, and it will, just like Brita removes contaminants out of traditional water that we drink every day, we can remove lead atoms out of it. That's another potential use for this sort of technology once it's ready for that phase.
That's great. All right, so we're still going to answer the questions. We can see them on the side here, but we're also going to open up the cam right now. So if anyone wants to jump in, we already got a caller here. Let's see who this person is. It's loading. It's Lyle Tomlinson, everybody.
Hey.
What's up, Lyle? What's going on?
Hey, man. How's it going?
I just want to introduce Lyle to everybody. Lyle is actually going to be our guest on Science Unplugged in 2 weeks, and he's a neuroscientist. So don't want to give too much away about what Lyle does. But Lyle, thanks for joining us. And do you have a question for Jesse?
No, I just wanted to use the video. I'm kidding. I have a question. So you kind of got to some of what I was sort of thinking about, but I was kind of interested in what the end game was. So kind of like how you spoke about how the radioactive filters sort of turn this radioactivity into glass so that you can store it in safe places. I'm also interested in that bacteria arsenic project that you had. Like because I don't fully understand it, I was wondering whether or not like the bacteria that are now filled with arsenic become a problem. Is it like trying to get in a bunch of ant eaters in order to get rid of the ants in your house now?
Yeah, so first of all, welcome, Lyle, sexiest man in America. How you doing, sir? Lyle's been working out a lot. So the end game, obviously when you're dealing with toxins, you're not going to make matter disappear. So what you try to do is you try to concentrate the toxin to a point where it's more manageable and it can be removed from the environment. And then we could eventually store it or reuse it if it's in the case of radioactive waste, for instance. So you're always thinking about concentrating it or potentially removing it from a source that can be more contaminable and moving it into a more controllable phase. So with the waste like uranium and plutonium, the end goal is getting it into a facility where it's stored behind lead walls in these borosilicate glasses. And so it's safe from, when I went to one of these facilities, one of them is located in Savannah Riverside in South Carolina. And the radiation that you get in these facilities is less than when you eat a banana every day. So that's the end game in that case, right? If you're eating a banana, you're getting more radiation from potassium than you are in these facilities. So they're extremely safe compared to if you have just a liquid soup like what's happening in Chernobyl. That's extremely, there are photographs in Chernobyl where people actually left their brand new cars and ran for their lives. So that's the worst case scenario. Now Now, in terms of the arsenic bacteria, or the cellular engines for toxic removal, as we call them, the end goal there will be sort of to attach these in my head. So this is a very theoretical project, meaning we haven't actually tested the material yet. But you always have to think about end goals. End goals is to also make a sort of Brita filter. We can attach these bacteria to ligands or constrict them to a particular area, and then we can introduce them into a water that's contaminated with arsenic, have them do their job, go nuts and eat all the arsenic, and then we pull them out of the system.
Hold on, sorry. Somebody alerted, put a phone call into the jargon police here. They're asking for clarification of the term ligand. Can you please clarify ligand?
Yes. So, you know, in the Brita filter, right, we have that black stuff that sometimes comes out in your water, right, the charged carbon particles. There's a container for them. And so there's something that prevents them from leaking out into the water that you're actually drinking. We want to do the same thing with any of these technologies I'm talking about. We want to be able to harvest all of that contamination once we've removed it from water or from soils. And then we want to be able to take it to somewhere safer and essentially treat it at that point. So the end goal for all of these are removing them from the environment and putting them into a lab facility or somewhere where they can be either reused or taken care of in a much more controlled manner.
Cool. That sounds pretty cool, Jesse. That sounds really cool.
So, thank you for coming on here and making this, whole experience a lot sexier. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Well, we can keep you on for a little bit if you don't mind hanging on screen. We'll close out the Aldo Center logo, and we can keep that spot open for some new questions if you want to hang around.
I actually have lab meeting tomorrow, and I have not started the presentation, so I kind of need to get working on that.
Lyle's got to go put together a PowerPoint.
You guys will see Lyle in a couple weeks, though. Stay tuned.
2 weeks.
It's gonna be great.
Lyle Tomlinson. We're gonna talk about neuroscience.
Take it easy, guys.
Peace. Nice seeing you again, man.
All right, that was awesome. And that's exactly how we want this to work for all the new people. You come on, you ask a question, the scientist answers the question, and as soon as you're satisfied, you jump off, and we free it up for the next person. And we got people asking questions on the side, so we can keep the slot open. So if you just want to ask your question directly, feel free to jump in at any time. So Joe Anderson asks, and I think he's getting this from, I think it was Superman 3 or Superman 2. With Christopher Reeves, where he just collected all the nuclear missiles and then put them in a big net and tossed them into the sun. Why can't we just hurl the nuclear waste into the sun?
That's a fantastic question, Joe. Let me tell you why. It's real simple, this answer. It's too expensive. No one wants to pay for it. So until we can make it cheaper to get things to the sun, I mean, we can barely get people to the moon or to Mars. Furthermore, getting massive... we have 130 metric tons. So think about how much energy and money it would take to get that past Earth's, even our atmosphere, even into space, and then direct it somewhere where it won't potentially be a threat later on to us. So it's very expensive to treat it in that particular way. But that would definitely solve the problem, right? Just send it out. Bye. It's not our problem. But yeah, it's definitely too expensive.
I just realized that people can't call in too when the question is up. So we're going to be put your questions up. We'll read them from the side. And so please, or just jump in and ask a question too. So
there's another question that I want to address on the side, P. Is that fine?
Yeah, you can say, no, by all means. Which one is it?
So Joe has another great question, which is, can geochemistry help us find new energy sources? That's a fantastic question. So the group that I'm a part of in Stony Brook actually really cares about that particular question. And there are people in my group. I don't personally work on these projects, but there are people in my group actually working on that problem right now. There are people in my groups that are working on materials that you can actually introduce to water and essentially split water into oxygen and hydrogen. And it does that through a reaction that comes from the sun. So you're using the sun energy to break apart water and use that as a fuel source. And so there are people working on that currently. So we care about that question, and that's obviously a big mission that pretty much every geochemist group is probably thinking about in America. How can we make new, clean materials for the future?
energy sources. That's great. That's awesome. Kyle here. Kyle's got what? I can't even talk right now. I'm so excited about what's going on. I can't even speak properly. What's a day in the life of a geochemist? Field work, lab work. What do you tell me what your environment is. What are your tools?
Right. So my group primarily rely on several government labs. And to anyone who's never been to a government lab, you should definitely try to see them. Google them when you're done here. They're fantastic places. I like to call them the Wall Street of science. The minute you enter these facilities, there are Nobel laureates. There are posters on the wall. There's one really close to Stony Brook, which is one of the reasons that I actually came here, called Brookhaven National Lab. And this laboratory is responsible for a number of Nobel winning prizes. And so at these facilities, what we tend to use, and I'm going to get ringing by the jargon police, there's a term called...
I can hear them. I can hear them coming up the street here.
It's called synchrotrons. So there's a
what?
buzzword.
A sync of what?
The sync of what? Synchrotron. So
okay, what's
a synchrotron? What is a synchrotron? Well, I like to think of a synchrotron as a type of circular particle acceleration. So you're accelerating these particles. These particles are electrons, and we use devices such as magnets to manipulate the electrons. So think of a facility that has the length of half a mile, but it's in a circle, and we're essentially accelerating these electrons in a circle that's a half a mile long. And every time that electron changes direction, it gives off X-rays, and those X-rays are extremely bright. How bright? Well, when was the last time you tried to look directly into the sun? These X-rays are actually 10 billion times brighter than the sun. But we use them and we focus them down to a focal point where we can actually look at materials, and it tells us about the atomic arrangement in the material. So part of what we care about is not only how can we make these materials, but what is the atomic structure of them. So when we think about my Nano Alcatraz, we need to make sure each uranium and plutonium atom is being safely stored. In order for us to do that, we need to pay attention to the atoms around those materials.
Bob just jumped in. Bob, you have a question for Jesse?
Hey, Bob.
Are you a science teacher?
I used to be a science teacher. I'm certified in 6 through 12, but I don't do that currently.
Why, man?
Eventually, I want to do it, but in order for us to be a great science teacher, you also need to do great science. I think through these experiences, I can bring this back to the classroom eventually, and I can enrich my students at a higher level, so that I understand how these facilities operate, how research operates, and that's what we really need to teach students. I don't want to teach out of a textbook. I want to bring students to the Wall Street of science. I want to bring them to Brookhaven National Lab and say, hey, here's an X-ray that's 10 billion times brighter than the sun, and this is what we can do with it. We can image things like the double helix in DNA. We can image things like the devices in your MP3s that actually store all of the memory in it. And I think that's going to drive the passion to get students into science, instead of saying, oh, yeah, I've been pontificating with this boring textbook that was written, 100 years ago. So that's why I'm doing this journey right now, is to just learn more science so I can bring it back to the classroom.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Bob, for the question. All right. So you mentioned that the synchrotron here at Brookhaven Labs, it produces light that's 1 billion times brighter than the sun?
10 billion times brighter than the sun. That's average. Actually, the new synchrotron is more powerful, but we can get it to the nitty-gritty. Yeah, 9 zeros. Well, 10 zeros, because it's 10 billion. So it's extremely bright. And when you get light that's that bright, you can see really fine details in materials.
This is, somebody mentioned Carl Sagan. This is where I bring in my Carl Sagan impression. Billions upon billions of times brighter than the sun. That's so great. So, and for people who don't know, this is the brightest light source on the planet. Right, there is nowhere else on planet Earth that has a source of light as bright as Brookhaven National Lab.
For now, the synchrotron game is very competitive, and so currently we have the brightest one. America's #1 again, for now. Eventually, there will be other light sources that come on that will be brighter than Brookhaven. But for now, we do boast that we have the brightest light source. And it's only 30 minutes away from Stony Brook, so that's great.
Joe Anderson is a big science fan. He's always about this stuff. He's been waiting like months for Science Unplugged to come back. He's like, come on, Pete.
It's only been off for 1 month, but he's been waiting months. Yeah. Hey, Joe.
And that kind of relates to my question. First of all, I wanted to say, Jesse, I find the stuff that you do and Peter to be like noble quests. I mean, you want to clean up the environment. You want to do great things. To me, there's nothing better that someone can strive to do in their life. And I personally thank you for choosing that path. So my question is, I get really giddy when I start thinking about science and all the wonderful things that it does, and the stuff I see is just mind blowing. My question is, what, if anything, is there that does that for you, that just makes you all just oh, it's so cool?
Well, I have to go back to the first time I was visiting Stony Brook for my so when you're going to be a doctoral student, they actually recruit you. So you come in, it's the one time where scientists can actually be treated as sort of top athletes. They fly you in or they drive you in. They make you stay in a nice hotel. They wine and dine you. They tell you how great their program is. And as part of that trip, they took us to Brookhaven National Lab. And I'll tell you, Joe, the first day I walked onto the experimental floor of a synchrotron, it changed my life forever. I mean, it was, just seeing Nobel Prize after Nobel Prize on the wall, your heart starts to race, right? This is it. This is what science is about. And so if you can picture a facility where you have hundreds of scientists, all of them are world class, and they're all working using one instrument, and you enter this facility and they're telling you about X-rays that are 10 billion times brighter than the sun, that is really the point that I get really giddy about. I love going to these facilities. And then if you have experiment that is successful at these type of facilities, then that really brings it home, because now you feel like you're contributing. And as I said in the beginning of this blab, our goals, I never think about being Einstein or being Rodinger or one of these really sort of noteworthy scientists. All I wanted to do was add one more inch to the shoulder of these giants. If I can just contribute one little drop into the bucket, then my job is done. And so whenever I get close to that, I think that's what really drives me and gives me that giddy feeling that I'm actually contributing to society in a positive way and not just spending taxpayer money doing nothing.
And that's a great point, because I bring this up all the time. And you just mentioned a government lab, and you just mentioned our research is funded by the fine folks that are watching us right now, if they're in the United States. Right? So, your tax dollars are going to people like us who are trying to, like Jesse, trying to solve these problems that could have huge implications on our life, our health, the well-being of our children in the future. So, thank you. I like to say thank you to
that was a great question, Joe. I appreciated that question.
You, thank you for paying your taxes.
Thanks, Jesse. I'll step up. Yeah, your tax dollars really are at work here.
That's
doing
right.
Good things.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
That's great. So let's ask Chris's question here, and I want to ask more about the synchrotron because you do some cool stuff there too. Chris wants to know, he's heard of some good results using mushrooms to decontaminate soil. So anything about mycological solutions for environmental pollutants? Can we just plant mushrooms over the place?
So there are a bunch of people that work on, and you can start the jargon police now. It's a term called phytoremediation.
Coming around the corner. Oh, hold on. Oh, there we go. Phytoremediation. Phytoremediation.
So that term is just a fancy term for using plants or using, life sources like that to remove contaminants from soils or from water sources. And so nature has figured out how to do a lot of these things that we're trying to do synthetically. So there are situations where mushrooms or other type of plants have a particular affinity for a certain element or a certain toxin, and we introduce them into that environment. They remove the toxin. Then you have to deal with, obviously, these contaminated mushrooms or these contaminated plants, and there's various methods to concentrate them or get rid of them safely. So there are systems in which nature does the job for us, and we either try to improve that in the lab, or we just utilize, if nature's doing it well enough, we can just take advantage of it.
Very cool. So, you mentioned the synchrotron, and this is one of the tools that you use to do your experiments. So, how do you use the synchrotron? What are you using it for? What is the application?
Right. So, the challenge with nanomaterials is if you use a lab source, a lab X-ray. So the instruments that you may have seen when you go to the dentist's office, or something slightly more powerful than that we use in our laboratories here at Stony Brook University, you cannot image nanomaterials, tiny materials, because there's just not enough electrons being generated, basically enough X-rays being generated to see what you're trying to look at. But when you go to these synchrotron facilities, there is so much, the light is so bright that you can see even individual atoms. And it tells you relationships between atoms. And so you use that really bright light to look at these nanomaterials. And that allows us to then build a structural model. So if you think about some of the materials that I'm working on, the only way we can understand them is by going to these government facilities and using these facilities, these synchrotrons. That's the only way for us to get data on where the atoms are. And some of the more famous ones I mentioned before is that's how they figured out the structure of DNA. The fact that DNA has a double helix was using X-rays also. So that's what we strive to do when you go into these facilities. Now, when you walk onto a synchrotron, it's very exciting, right? Because this light is so bright, it's very dangerous if you come into contact with it. So they have interlock systems to prevent any of the users from tampering with the beam, from the beam damaging you at all. So if you can think of, any sort of science fiction movie, there is an alarm that comes on, right? And there are flashing lights. Then you have to push a button in one side of the wall, and it's a wall that's concealed by lead. And your experiment is in there. The beam is sort of focused on where you're going to slide your experiment. You leave that room that's called a hutch. And you have to push a light on the outside of it, and that initiates the door. And it says, stand clear of the door, door closing, door closing. Then the hutch shuts down, and then you can initiate the beam. So the electrons are constantly spinning. But in order for you to tap into your particular line, because think of pipes coming out of a major water stream, and then you have all the plumbing coming out of it. In order for you to turn on your tap or your particular X-ray, you have to then initiate the beam. But the beam won't turn on until all these interlock systems are initiated, and it has to be done in a time sequence. And if you don't do it in time, it will shut down, and you have to start over. So it's very elaborate, but you feel like you're doing something exciting. It's like being on a movie scene. Now, if you get stuck in the hutch, which you need help to get stuck in the hutch, you literally need someone to initiate the beam and lock you in there. There is a button in there that you can actually press, and it dumps all the X-rays in the entire facility. Now, if you do that, your name goes on a hall of shame, and you pretty much should just retire from science, period. Like, that's the end of your career. It's never been done in any facility I've been to, but you're always petrified that you're going to be stuck or you make a mistake, and then you have to dump the beam, and then all these scientists, hundreds of them from all over the world, come, rushing down to your beam line to basically shame you. So it is very intricate being there. It's a lot of fun being there, but it's really exciting. That's probably the most exciting part of my job, is using those facilities.
The woes of a geochemist is just making sure you don't dump the X-ray beams.
Yeah.
I mean, it amazes me, though, that you're using X-ray radiation to study molecules, to study nanomaterials, to use to sequester radiation later on.
Right. Using radiation to sequester radiation. Yeah.
So there are still a lot of questions here, and actually, Joe had a question a while back, and we didn't. And this really gets to what I'm thinking is how this is going to get implemented. Like, how far are we from doing this? And he wants to know, will removing these toxins from the environment save us money, like in terms of healthcare and other things like that?
Right. So if you think of a simple case like Flint, Michigan, it's very difficult to put a monetary value on it, but there are going to be thousands of people that live there that are drinking contaminated water or exposed to contaminated water. And if you think about the adults, if you think about the children there that are being exposed to lead and their brains are still developing and they're very susceptible to lead poisoning, you're talking about the healthcare system has to pay for their healthcare for the rest of their lives, right? So it's very difficult to quantify the number that you put on remediation, but just think about if you opened your taps tomorrow and a brown liquid came out of it that had atoms in there that were toxic to you, toxic to your children, your parents, or your loved ones, there's really no price that you would put on it. Your only interest would be on just being safer. So we can throw a lot of numbers around, but I think it's very difficult to quantify the value of human life. And so that's what I think about when I'm in the lab. I think most scientists don't get into science for money, but we do live in an economy where we need to have some monetary value on it. So, for instance, some of these technologies that we're working on in a place like Savannah Riverside, where we have 130 tons, if we can utilize that for, concentrate that waste and potentially use it in power plants, that there could be economic benefits there. There could be economic benefits in other countries, for instance, if we decided to package that and sell it to countries that potentially have contamination issues, like India and Bangladesh that have extremely high levels of arsenic concentration, and hundreds of millions of people are getting poisoned there currently. But I just look at it from the perspective of helping those people and not necessarily putting a dollars and cents value on it.
So we have about 5-6 minutes left. So
oh no, it just went by in a flash.
I know, right? And everyone seems to be having an amazing time listening to you talk about all the awesome work that you're doing. And Joe, I want to give the last audience question from Joe here, because I think it's really great. And then I have a final question for you. Joe wants to know, he has a child who's nuts about chemistry. What advice do you have for her if she wants to become a scientist like you?
I mean, I'm kind of envious of this generation. I think this generation, meaning people that are younger than me, because I know a lot of people are looking at me like, oh, you're from this generation. But anyway, they're growing up with access to information that just was not accessible in the past. I mean, you have things like Khan Academy and other free resources where you can access courses online about anything. On top of that, there are a lot of government-sponsored programs like National Science Foundation, or if you're in another country, just look up whatever the funding agency for your country is. They'll have programs for high school students, junior high school students, where they can visit these facilities. So Brookhaven National Lab and all the other national labs, for instance, have these sort of feeder programs where you can expose students who are extremely young to world-class experiments, world-class scientists. They really give them invigorating and excited about the stuff that we're doing. And me personally, I am a hands-on learner. So things really come to me when I'm touching materials, when I'm doing experiments. That refocuses me. Like, just looking at a textbook is extremely boring to me, is a necessary evil, but I do much better if I'm actually physically doing something. So you can apply for these programs. You can go to nsf.gov and you can look up, I don't know how old your particular child is, but you can look up programs for high school students, for junior high school students. You can look up programs for college undergraduates where you can visit these facilities or visit universities and get started doing research now. I wish I had done way more research when I was younger. I think I would have been a better scientist at this point. So that would be my advice to all the young scholars out there, is just do it. Go out and get involved and get passionate about a project. Even if you're not super passionate about it now, once you start walking into these facilities, guaranteed you're going to be hooked, just by the scale of it.
As soon as you see the sign and the speaker saying doors closing, and the lights go
now, initiate the beam. This is like science. This is the cutting edge. We're laughing about it, but this facility in Brookhaven is $1 billion facility. So a lot of US dollars are going into this, and it's because we have the ability to look at the new batteries that are coming out as they're working. We have the ability to look at new vaccines and viruses. A virus like Tamiflu was imaged and structurally studied, the stuff that prevents us from getting the flu, at a synchrotron. So there are real world benefits to these monies that we're spending. And I think the quicker you get exposed to these things, if you're a young scientist, you're gonna be hooked immediately.
So, and to answer Joe's question, you can visit these places. They usually give tours to the public. They have summer camps and a lot of other things too. So all you have to do is go on their websites, and you can schedule tours. They're open to the public. Well, not the dangerous areas of them, but you can get a tour. So I want to end on a question that I finished with all my guests, and the purpose of this show of Science Unplugged is to give the public the access to scientists like us, to pick our brains, to see what we're doing, but more importantly for us as scientists, to communicate to the public in a way that is understandable for them, in a way that is not laced and laden with complex terms and technical data and stuff that they're not going to have any comprehension of unless they were our peers critiquing our data and our graphs and stuff like that. So I want your opinion as to what is the importance of us scientists participating in something like this? What is the importance of doing scientific communication?
So this is a question that's near and dear to me. I think that if you go back, in the beginning of science, scientists had to naturally go to the public and hold a forum and get them involved directly in our work in order to get it funded. If you're looking up at the stars, trying to predict how the planets are moving, talking about some of our predecessors in Galileo and so forth, they would have to get funding directly from the people. Now we've moved away from that model because we have funding agencies like National Science Foundation and the NIH, National Initiative. So I say that to say it is extremely important for us to educate the public because we are using your taxpayer dollars every day. And so I think it's a travesty that we don't get more communication with the public and educate them about what we're doing. And because of that, we're living the consequences of it now. There are congressmen walking into Congress with snowballs in their hand, pontificating about how global warming isn't real. And I think that's a direct connection, and that responsibility falls squarely on scientists because we're doing a terrible job of informing society and also getting the knowledge directly to them. And so I think programs like this is the beginning of that change, to give science back to society, the funders of it, the people who are actually paying into it. And I look forward to doing programs like this because it really allows me to connect directly with the people who are paying for the work that I'm actually doing, that it's going to affect every day. So I thank Pete again for doing this. I want to give a special shout out to the Alan Alda Center for supporting this initiative and making it possible. And for all the other science communicators that are out there in the interwebs paying attention to this, I want to give you guys some strength and power to go ahead and continue doing this. So thank you all for your attention. I mean, this was great.
And I know we do have some people in the chat that are from other universities too. I know Kyle is actually a chemistry PhD at another university in Michigan, I believe. Nice. And since we've been doing this, people have been showing much interest in learning the art of scientific communication. So, we're a virus, and we hope we're infecting the world.
Yep. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. We need to increase the numbers and get this show more popular. So thank you.
So just before we sign off, I just want to remind you, this is going to happen every Thursday. We're back on it. All right, we're moving forward. So next Thursday we have an amazing guest, Ruchi Shah, and she is developing a new mosquito repellent. And if you want to know what the secret ingredient might entail, just take a whiff of your armpit, and you might. you might get a.
It's not so much a secret. It's not a secret.
You might learn what the secret ingredient is. But Ruchi, when she's not trying to figure out how to repel mosquitoes, she's trying to learn and understand how cervical cancer works. So it's going to be a twofold. We might have to go extra time on this one because we have two really important subjects, and she's just brilliant, and I'm so excited that we're going to have her on, and it's going to be a great show. So we're going to start the countdown timer for the next show, and guys, subscribe, and really, to make this show popular, share it, tweet it, post it. When you see that countdown timer on, just let it explode all over the world, and let's get this show to be Blab's #1 stop for scientific information, and for the other shows we have a lot of other science shows going on this platform too, and we encourage all of them. The more science, the better. So we have a new theme song. I played it coming in, and I'm going to play it for us coming out. But as I always like to sign off, and Jesse, thank you so much. You were a rock star tonight.
Peace and love, people. See you all.
Peace and love. And as always, keep calm, science on.
Peace.